When my friend was 8, she aced a quiz, a 49er out of 50. Her only mistake? She marked false on the statement, all cops are good. Looking back, was she really wrong? I mean, sure, cops are supposed to be paragons of justice and protectors of the people, but we all know it's not always that simple. Case in point, this dude. As far as Autobots go, Prowl is complicated. At his best, he's a brilliant tactician and a by-the-book hero. But at his worst, he'll take that book, rip out the parts he doesn't like, toss them into a fire, and then convince everyone the fire was part of a brilliant strategy all along. Meet the cop bot who always says he's doing what's right, but doesn't always do it the right way. Through the years, as robots in disguise, the Transformers have taken on just about every shape, size, and style you can imagine. But even with all that variety, there are some designs that just stick. Some looks that don't just define a character, they define a whole faction. Take the Decepticons, for example. Sure, you've got tanks, guns, and Walkmans, but when I think of classic Decepticon, there's one silhouette that stands above the rest. The Seekers, Starscream, Skywarp, Thundercracker. Ruthless warriors with tall jet intake shoulders, wings like cutting blades, and blasters locked onto their arms, ready to rain down chaos from the sky. Fast, cold, unstoppable. That to me is the Decepticon look. But what about the good guys? Of course the Autobots had their answer. The Datsun brothers, Bluestreak, Prowl, and Smokescreen. With their car front chests and little door wings, and most importantly, a toy head sculpt that the actual Autobot logo was based on, these dudes, for me, were the blueprint of what a classic Autobot should look like. Slick, sharp, heroic. Now, while I'd argue that collectively the Datsun brothers haven't exactly topped the list of iconic Autobots like Prime or that little yellow dude, they've always struck me as some of the most interesting of personalities in the Autobot ranks. Each one is pretty distinctive. Bluestreak, traditionally he's the guy who won't stop talking. Endlessly, a total motor mouth. But deep down, it's not just a quirk, it's a coping mechanism, his non-stop chatter. It's a shield, a way to drown out the trauma of watching his home destroyed in the war. And Smokescreen? Oh, Smokescreen, that's the wild card. The gambler, a slick talking specialist in, well, smoke and mirrors. His job wasn't to be the brute force of the battlefield, it was to manipulate, misdirect, and outthink the opposition. A real deceptive type of guy. And I have a soft spot for both of them. Bluestreak was actually the first Autobot car toy I ever owned, but when that figure inevitably vanished into the Bermuda Triangle of childhood toys, I was devastated. And later, finding Smokescreen on the shelf felt like getting a second chance on a lost toy, like Primus was smiling down on me. But here's the thing, nostalgia and quirkiness aside, my favorite of the trio today isn't the chatty survivor or the charming trickster. It's the one I never had as a kid. It's Prowl. Not because he's the coolest toy. I mean, police car? Boring. Or I guess the flashiest fighter. I loved Prowl for one reason and one reason alone. Character. As a kid, I loved the fact that Prowl was basically Optimus Prime's right-hand bot. Sure, he and Jazz both filled that second-in-command role, but I don't know, the smooth-talking, music-loving Jazz just felt like the guy the writers wanted you to like. He was cool without even trying, but being the non-conformist that I am, I was never wired to pick the obvious fan favorite. I naturally gravitated towards the other guy. The one who suspiciously sounded like a certain blonde real American hero that was a favorite of mine. A huge shout out to voice actor Michael Bell. Officially, Prowl was Optimus Prime's military strategist and analyst, the one who says if a mission should happen, how it should happen, and whether everyone else's terrible ideas should get shut down immediately. Unofficially, he's the Autobot you can call when the mission absolutely, positively needs to go according to plan. Prowl is calm, loyal, and patient in ways other Autobots aren't. And he's about as predictable as a spreadsheet, which doesn't always make him the life of the party or anyone's favorite hang. Just ask Grimlock. More on that later on. While everyone else is revving up their engines and flexing blasters, Prowl has already broken down the entire battlefield like it was an algebra problem. 800 moving targets? Tracked. Probability of enemy flanking? Accounted for. Expected counter tactics? Already anticipated. Victory? Logically mapped. If there is a problem, he'll solve it. Check out the hook while his logic resolves it. Yeah, this guy is ice, baby. If logic had a physical form, it'd look a lot like Prowl or a certain one-eyed purple Decepticon, but I digress. Like I mentioned earlier, I never actually owned the vintage toy, so my true introduction to Prowl was through the original Transformers cartoon. And yeah, while admittedly he was never the spotlight guy, he didn't stand out for being annoyingly abrasive like Ironhide or entertainingly delusional like Cliffjumper. I would argue that he did have one of the coolest and most memorable fight scenes early on in the series. In the episode Roll For It, Prowl and Bluestreak track down Starscream and company to a hangar where they are stripping fighter jets for parts. And mid-fight, Prowl's battle computer is knocked offline from a direct hit to his chest by Soundwave. Crippled, Prowl extends antennae from his head, scans the area looking for an external processor to patch into, and finds the legendary human ally Chip Chase. And just like that, Chip is piloting Prowl like a human-powered Autobot puppet, typing commands and basically turning him into an unstoppable force, dodging laser fire, flipping through the air, and powering up a jet to fire its missiles directly at the cons, literally giving the Seeker jets a taste of their own medicine. Looking back, it feels like a one-off cool moment, a perfect blend of man meets machine. But what's awesome is that idea doesn't stop there. I would say that Chip and Prowl connection, man and bot sharing a body, would turn out to be a cool precursor to future Headmaster tech. And in one continuity, that exact concept plays an integral role in raising Prowl back from the dead. Wait, Prowl? Dead? Yeah, let's talk about Transformers the movie from 1986. It's the year 2005 and Prowl is on a shuttle run to Earth to obtain much-needed energon and supplies from Autobot City for Moonbase 1 as part of a larger assault plan to retake Cybertron. But mid-route, the mission goes sideways. Like history repeating itself, the shuttle is hijacked by the Decepticons, and despite Prowl's maximum effort, he's taken out. Not by Megatron, not by Starscream, but by Scavenger, the Constructicon best known for having a very, very low self-esteem. So, hey, at least he can put one thing on his resume, being the guy who took down one of the most brilliant strategic minds in Autobot history with one shot. Speaking of which, that wasn't just any laser blast. Unlike his previous cartoon injury where Soundwave briefly scrambled Prowl's brain, this one straight up vaporized it, setting off a chain reaction that literally burns Prowl up from the inside, with his eyes and mouth vents burning out fumes. It's one of the most gruesome and traumatic Transformer deaths portrayed in a cartoon. And that wasn't even the end of it. Prowl gets one final shout-out in a post-movie episode, Dark Awakening, where his name is solemnly read off among the fallen Autobots, and his grave is shown housed inside an interstellar Autobot mausoleum, which ultimately ends up plunging into a red sun. Just to really drive the point home, Prowl wasn't just mostly dead, he was dead. Or so you'd think, because apparently Japan didn't get the memo. Thanks to the way release schedules work out, the Transformers movie didn't premiere there until 1989, years after the Japanese exclusive series Headmasters had already begun production. Meaning, as far as the Land of the Rising Sun was concerned, Prowl didn't die and he pops up alive and well in the Headmasters show, which sparked another Transformers debate on whether Prowl was dead or alive. Eventually, the Japanese tried to make sense of it all in the fiction attached to a later toy line called Binaltech, and in true Transformers fashion, it involved advanced technology, spark transfers, and a familiar human face from Prowl's past. In this updated continuity, thanks to a time-displaced Ravage, yeah, just go with me on this one, Present-day Wheeljack is warned of his and Prowl's death in a future timeline and rigs him up with a backup system called the Genetronic Translink, basically a tech failsafe to let Prowl remotely control a new body if his original one was ever destroyed. Unfortunately, during a mission near Saturn, Prowl is critically injured and the GT system malfunctions, sending his spark drifting into subspace, lost. And in a surprising twist, Chip Chase, the same human genius who once took remote control of Prowl's body in the cartoon, uploads his own mind into a backup Prowl body. And so, Prowl 2 was born. Same skills, new spark, familiar face. But it didn't end there. Years later, the original Prowl spark is recovered and Chip willingly gives up the Prowl body so that the real Autobot strategist could be restored at last. And just like that, the circle is closed. Prowl was complete again, thanks to tech, multiversal shenanigans, and a very loyal friend with a very old modem. And with that, let's move on from Prowl of the cartoons and see how he fares in another medium, the comics. But don't worry, we'll return to the animated world a little later on. But before that, let's get into Prowl in the original Marvel Comics run where he doesn't really stray too far from the version we saw in the G1 cartoon. Yeah, I know it's a bit anticlimactic, but Prowl is more often not one at the center of the action. I mean, he's there, just not at the forefront as a major featured player. If anything, he's more of a quiet constant in the background, steady, loyal, and occasionally frustrated whenever someone doesn't follow proper procedure. One of the more memorable Prowl-centric stories comes not from the US run, but from across the pond in the Marvel UK comics, where millions of years before the war, Prowl is introduced as a member of an elite squad called the Magnificent Six, alongside fellow Autobots Jazz, Wheeljack, Sunstreaker, Inferno, and Stampede, on a no-hope mission to take down Decepticon torturer Megadeth. It's a gritty tale of psychological warfare and sacrifice. Megadeth doesn't just fight them, he breaks them, targeting their minds as much as their bodies, and even tortures and kills one of the Autobots in front of the others. I'll give you a guess which one bites the dust, and let's just say his death didn't cause a stampede of angry readers. Anyway, the mission ends in victory, but with a massive emotional fallout, and the trauma of that mission leaves a silent mark on Prowl, another layer to a bot who hides fragility behind logic. Elsewhere in the series, Prowl's authority is constantly challenged by more explosive personalities, most notably the impatient, barely domesticated Grimlock. That clash reaches a boiling point after Optimus Prime's death and Grimlock's rise to Autobot leadership. Prowl defies orders, criticizes Grimlock's recklessness, and generally acts like the tactical buzzkill Grimlock doesn't want, but probably needs. He's basically a constant thorn in Grimlock's side, the type that ends up getting chucked out of the Ark right onto Unicron. Yes, that happened. Beyond that, there really isn't much else to Prowl in the Marvel era. He mostly acted as a foil to the bigger movers and shakers in the series, which is a far cry from what he would become in the more recent IDW Transformers universe, where this time around it was Prowl who was doing a lot of the strategic moving and shaking. And that's when Prowl, the character, really comes alive. The IDW universe is known for digging deep into Transformers lore and rebuilding everything from the ground up, taking third and fourth string characters, classic roster staples, and even brand new faces, then reinventing them into layered, complex personas. IDW throws these bots into sprawling, tightly woven storylines full of intrigue, betrayal, shifting ideologies, and moral chaos. And more often than not, lurking at the center of those naughty plots is Prowl. No longer the two-dimensional by-the-book cop bot, Prowl evolves into something much deeper and at times darker, to the point where you may find yourself wondering, is this guy even an Autobot anymore? But speaking of wondering, if you find yourself wondering what the best way to help my channel out is, the answer is simple. Just keep watching. Yup, while a like, comment, share, or sub are nice and very much appreciated, apparently, the real key to a channel's success on YouTube is extended watch time. So, if you are digging this story, go ahead and watch another, and another, And another. I mean, you could just keep me playing in the background as you go about your day. That would be very much appreciated, as well as any other way you choose to help me out. So, thank you. Now, across IDW's 13-year run, Prowl would become one of the most brilliantly manipulative and morally troubling figures in the entire Transformers mythos. Far from the straight arrow strategist we knew from G1, this version of Prowl walked the razor's edge between necessary logic and cold-blooded control, earning him as many enemies as allies. In a lot of ways, he evolved right along with his deco, the once clean black and white cop aesthetic slowly blending together into a complicated gray, fitting for a character who would make every calculated choice feel like another step into moral ambiguity. From the start, Prowl distinguished himself not on the battlefield but behind the scenes, pulling strings, twisting arms, and making decisions nobody else wanted to face. His early career as chief strategist bloomed into full-blown manipulation, psychological leverage over allies, pressure, threats, even blackmail, all in the name of a greater good. Prowl personally arranged for the uber-powerful Decepticon overlord to be secretly installed aboard the exploratory ship Lost Light, home of over 200 crew members led by Rodimus, and coerced Chrome Dome into performing illegal Nemo surgery on him, chalking it up to research for future Autobot survival. And as expected, it didn't end well for several unfortunate crew members. Just ask Pipes. Ouch. But Prowl's cold calculations didn't stop with using Decepticon monsters as science experiments. He turned that same detachment towards his own allies. After growing tired of Autobots listening to reckless heroes while ignoring the more measured wisdom that he offered, Prowl took matters into his own hands, secretly shipping a recently recovered but extremely damaged beloved war veteran Cup to a repair facility to be rebuilt. Not healed, not restored, rewritten. Cup's new body came loaded with personality subroutines designed to make him more compliant, more logical, and, more importantly, a mouthpiece for Prowl's agenda. As Prowl himself coolly put it, when Cup speaks, you won't even see my lips move. That's one more line crossed, turning an ally to a puppet. But the dirt on Prowl goes even deeper as he secretly orders the assassination of Ratbat, carried out by the brutally efficient RC. And when the Insecticon bombshell tampered with his brain, Prowl marched straight into Decepticon territory and executed him on the spot. No trial, no remorse, just a clean shot, justified as self-defense of the mind. The twist? Bombshell had already planted a Cerebro shell, secretly turning Prowl into his pawn and making him do this. Poor Jackie. And ultimately turning him into the unwilling head of Devastator. For most bots, that'd be a nightmare scenario, but not for Prowl. Once freed, he embraced the role. The Constructicons even preferred combining with him as his ruthless logic gave Devastator a terrifying edge. And when he brought the giant to Earth, there was no subtlety left. He combined, intimidated, and manipulated, wielding Devastator like a sledgehammer, convinced the ends always justified the devastation. But apparently, time spent with the Constructicons gave Prowl a taste for combining. When the Combiner Wars erupted and titans like Superion, Defensor, Devastator, and Menasor clashed, Prowl decided to even the odds in the most Prowl way possible, by forcing it. Using the enigma of combination, he merged himself with Optimus Prime, Ironhide, Mirage, and Sunstreaker, creating the Autobot combiner, Optimus Maximus. The fusion turned the tide of the battle, but at a cost. It wasn't just their bodies that combined, their minds did too. And what the others saw inside Prowl was enough to shatter any remaining trust. Despite the victory, Prowl's manipulations alienated his allies once and for all. He was arrested soon after. No longer the strategist behind the scenes, but the weapon everybody wanted locked away. And when Optimus tried to reach out to reason with his old friend who once stood beside him with his fist, Prowl only replied that morality had no place in warfare. After so much time as part of Devastator, he admitted he could no longer tell where the Autobots ended and the Decepticons began. The two clashed one final time, with Prime eventually getting the upper hand with his blaster pointed at Prowl's face. But when Prime realized that some fragment of Prowl's consciousness now lived on within him through the combiner bond, he couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger and finish the fight. Eventually, a very specific act from Prowl's past comes back to bite him, hard, in the form of a creepy little spider with a habit of crawling into robots' heads and bursting out full-sized. Literally, just ask poor Roadbuster how that turned out. Ugh. But this wasn't just some random horror. This was personal, because before he became the eight-legged lunatic known as Tarantulas, this spider dude was Prowl's secret partner in Autobot Black Ops, the scientist Methuselah, who together built unethical tech like the Noise Maze, an extra-dimensional prison, and the Aquitas, a guilt-sensing supercomputer meant to judge wartime crimes. But when Prowl realized how far things had gone, he conveniently had Methuselah thrown into the Noise Maze, sealing him away in torment for cycles. And from that torment emerged Tarantulas, a twisted genius hungry for revenge. So Tarantulas kidnaps Prowl, not just to torture him, but to expose him, to drag out every buried war crime into the light. The Wreckers eventually track them down and collapse the Noise Maze and recover Prowl. But make no mistake, this wasn't a heroic rescue, it was damage control. The Wreckers knew that if Prowl's crimes went public, the Autobots could crumble from within, which leads to the unfortunate execution of the Autobot hubcap. A poor dude who knew too much and also had a penchant of talking. And while Prowl didn't do the deed, he thought of it, and almost did, before the Wrecker Impactor beats him to it, bitterly spitting out that there will always be guys like me to pull the trigger when guys like you can't. You're welcome, Prowl. Prowl walks away without charges or a court-martial, but not without consequence. The Wreckers, including former allies like RC and Cup, who now realizes how thoroughly he was used, no longer see a strategist. They see a manipulator who fed his conscience to the grinder and called it logic. It's not legal justice, but something far worse. Prowl survives, but utterly alone. And yet, Prowl pressed on, arming worlds, dodging arrests, and coordinating defenses to counter the impending threat of Unicron. He gets himself a ship, the Peaceful Revolution, and a new crew composed of Throttlebot survivors Chase, Rollbar, and Goldbug, who in this universe is not Bumblebee, and the Jangle Man himself, Wheelie. Stardrive, the last living space knight of the Soul Star Order, and a big dumb lug named Garnak. Yeah, not the most groundbreaking team, but whatever. When Unicron finally arrives, Prowl joins the fight. Ever the strategist, he operates with the same cold precision that had defined his life, weaponizing forbidden tech and planning every move like the war had never ended. But by then, it wasn't about forgiveness. It was habit. Control was all he knew, and when Optimus Prime sacrificed himself to destroy Unicron, something in Prowl broke. The man with the plan finally stopped. After the war, he handed Megatron over for trial and later visited a broken Shockwave, admitting, perhaps to both of them, that people are defined not by what they believe, but what they do. Prowl survived, but when the dust settled, the question remained. What happens when the sharpest mind in the room realizes there's no one left who trusts him? Autobot hero? Fallen strategist? Moral monster? In IDW, Prowl was all of them. He wasn't just caught in the gray, he was the gray. Not gonna lie, that version of Prowl got dark. And while that's fascinating in its own right, I can't exactly end on a note that heavy. So how about we lighten things up a bit? Let's shift into something more positive and definitely more heroic. Enter Transformers Animated Prowl. Now, yes, before someone in the comments comes for me, technically this is a completely different character who just happens to share the name. But as a massive fan of Transformers Animated, there's no way I'm leaving this guy out. I mean, what's better than a sleek police-themed Autobot? How about a police-themed Autobot who's also a cyber ninja? In the world of Transformers Animated, a universe loosely hinted to be a far-flung continuation of the G1 cartoon, Prowl is a different kind of dude. Aside from sharing a name and being police-themed, he barely resembles his G1 predecessor. He trades his police car alt mode for a police motorcycle, and his battlefield tactics for martial arts serenity. Less military strategist and more cyber ninja sage. At the start, Prowl is everything you'd expect from a loner warrior. Aloof, highly observant, and borderline dismissive of teamwork. He values silence, precision, and a deep sense of balance. Teamwork? Not his thing, especially when the team includes grumps like Ratchet, loud and chaotic bots like Bulkhead, or pesky little dudes like Bumblebee. Stranded on Earth, Prowl slowly learns to reconnect with nature, his teammates, and himself. And in the end, that quiet spiritual warrior becomes the soul of the team. A soul that in the end he willingly gives up. In the finale of Transformers Animated, Megatron unleashes massive Omega Supreme clones armed with city-destroying bombs. The only way to stop them? Reforge the shattered Allspark into a protective energy field. Prowl alongside Jazz manages to gather its fragments, but the field needs one final spark to activate, and without hesitation, Prowl gives his own. By merging his life force with the Allspark, Prowl completes the shield, containing the blast and saving the day. He dies in the process, turning his long journey from lone warrior to selfless protector into one final act of pure heroism. While animated Prowl may not have been the original, I've always seen him as a true spiritual successor to the classic character. And speaking of spiritual successors, Prowl's name actually lived on into the Beast War era, where two very different Maximals carried the legacy forward. The first, Prowl the Lion, was part of the Combiner Team Magnaboss alongside fellow veterans Ironhide and Silverbolt. Said to be the same G1 Prowl reborn in a new Maximal body after the Great War. The second Prowl, Prowl the Owl, had a far stranger origin. This one was said to be the evolved form of Prowl 2 from the Binotech story, the experimental hybrid created when Chip Chase uploaded his consciousness into a Prowl body. In a way, Beast War didn't just carry on his name, it split his legacy in two, one tracing the survival of the Strategist, and the other preserving his bond with humanity. Now, all that being said, for all his longevity across eras, there was one version of Transformers where Prowl never got his moment in the spotlight. The live-action Bayverse. Now, to be fair, Prowl did get a shot, at least in the early planning stages of the 2007 Michael Bay film. He was reportedly on the short list of Autobots being considered to be featured. But in the end, Bay decided that instead of giving us a good cop to serve and protect, it'd be way cooler to go all in on a bad cop who punishes and enslaves. And just like that, Prowl was out and the Decepticon Barricade was in. Now look, I've got nothing against Barricade. He's earned his own place in the lore. And yes, I've covered him in a whole other video, link in the description below. But I secretly held on to the hope through several sequels that maybe, just maybe, Barricade would pull a twist and reveal himself to be an undercover Prowl. It never happened, and aside from a few cameos in tie-in comics which don't really count in my book, Prowl basically never made it into the Bayverse. And honestly, looking at what Michael Bay did to most of our beloved G1 characters not named Bumblebee, that might have been the greatest strategic win of Prowl's entire career. Because, let's face it, any real strategist would know that a character's success in the Transformers universe isn't just about dazzling with big screen CGI and explosions. No, it's about something far more tactical, or actually, tactile. Like, exactly how many toys of said character we can get our grubby little hands on. And by that metric, I believe that Prowl did pretty good. After the OG toy released in 1984 gradually faded from retail shelves in the following years, prompting his unfortunate death in the 1986 movie, the next version of Prowl would be released in 1990 in the form of a rather unspectacular, non-transforming Action Master. But hey, at least he came with a turbo cycle that transformed from motorcycle to a gun emplacement. The 90s saw Beast Wars Prowl come to life in plastic, with Prowl the Lion being released in 1997 alongside his Magnaboss forming buddies Ironhide and Silverbolt in a special Ultra Class 3-pack. And then Prowl the Owl being released in 2 color decos in 1999. Then in 2003, the aforementioned Japanese Binaltech line, featuring mostly G1 Autobots reimagined as modern cars, was launched, with their first release being the diversionary tactician Smokescreen. While not the most popular Autobot out there, Smokescreen as first choice made sense given despite his new alt mode as a Subaru Impreza, he was traditionally a Datsun brother, which meant he had 2 brothers who could also be released using the same mold at minimal cost. And so it wasn't a surprise that a year later we got Silver Streak, and then in 2005 we got Prowl, who curiously wasn't a repaint at all. He was a brand new design that transformed from an Acura RSX into a robot mode that sorta looked like Red Alert, because apparently that was the original plan. Either way, this specific Prowl toy, okay, actually, if you want to be technical about it, the US Alternators version of it has a great significance to me, as this, along with Alternator Sunstreaker, were the first 2 Transformer toys that I got as an adult that eventually birthed my second life as a toy collector. Yup, the ones that pushed me into that money-sucking rabbit hole that I am still sinking deeper and deeper into to this day. Oh, and this Prowl was also the very first toy that I modded, switching his legs around to give him a more Prowl-ish looking robot mode. 3 years later in 2008, we got Universe Prowl, who was sort of officially the first modern iteration of the G1 character. Remember, kiddies, Binaltech Prowl was supposed to be Prowl 2. That same year, we also saw the release of Titanium Series Prowl, which was based on an awesome Cybertronian mode design of the ultra-talented Filipino artist Don Figueroa. Unfortunately, despite the amazing design it was based on, this one was pretty much a clunker. I mean, could his upper half be any wider? Yikes. Anyway, aside from a series of other random releases of G1 Prowl like a simplistic Legends class, Bot Shots, Creo, and so on, the animated version of Prowl also arrived in toy shelves in 2008. A perfect translation of the hyper-stylized aesthetic of the show into plastic, complete with his signature throwing stars that stored neatly in his motorcycle wheels. And just when you thought that they couldn't top that, a year later, a retooled version was released with a motorcycle sidecar that could convert into armor bits and weaponry that turned this cyber ninja into a cyber samurai. And while Prowl never made an appearance in the series that followed animated, Transformers Prime, Smokescreen did, and thanks to him traditionally sharing a mold with his Datsun brother, Prowl got included in the toy line as well in 2013, which was cool. But the bigger news that year was that Prowl finally hit the big time with his first official masterpiece Transformers toy, which basically hit all the right design beats for a faithful masterpiece rendition of the OG toy and character. Like, as of now, this is the only decent Prowl for any masterpiece display, although his days are possibly numbered. We'll get to that in a bit. But first, back to the main retail line, where in 2015, Prowl made a return in the Combiner Wars line as a lazy repaint/retool of the Stunticon Dead End. Fortunately, Hasbro made up for that rather uninspired attempt by finally giving us a couple pretty back-to-basic versions of Prowl a few years later. First up, a grimy Cybertronian version in 2019's Siege line, and then a more traditional Earth mode version the next year for, well, Earthrise, which, if you want to talk really faithful to the original toy, also had a rather brittle windshield that was prone to breakage, and which Hasbro humorously, or is that morbidly, retooled in 2023 as Dead Prowl, thankfully sans the death fumes spewing from his face, and sold it in a 2-pack with an equally shot-up Ironhide, also thankfully before Megatron blew off his head, as part of the buzzworthy Bumblebee line. And just for kicks, for Hasbro's Legacy line, a G1-ified version of animated Prowl was also released that year as well. And finally, what would any decent toy rundown be without some unofficial third-party offerings? Like I said, while it did take quite a while, the official masterpiece Prowl eventually did start to show a little bit of age, especially for collectors looking for a more cartoon aesthetic. And so, sensing a growing need, third-party company DX9 released prototype shots of their take on a more toon-accurate Prowl named Devastator in 2024, which, as of this writing, is on the verge of being released, with final production shots being posted literally just a few weeks ago. And I have to say, this guy looks almost perfect if it weren't for those damn holes in his legs. Like, really? I know us collectors have been accused of being overly finicky, but I don't know, this just ruins the look for me. Of course, not to be outdone, and as always, playing the role of third-party bully, hoping to steal some thunder from DX9 is, well, Fans Toys, under the guise of Fantastic Model, who, right on cue, showed off renders of their planned masterpiece Toon Prowl on the eve of Devative's release. But you know what? Is it just me, or does it not look that great either? Oh well, only time will tell, but at least for me, it doesn't look quite clear-cut that Takara's official masterpiece Prowl's days on my shelf are numbered. And speaking of which, do you think that the Autobot Hound had any idea his days as Spike's BFF were numbered the moment the Autobots' human ally started hanging around with a certain little yellow bot? Poor guy. Why not show Hound some love by checking out his story here? Or if you want to watch my latest video, you can find it over here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope to hear from you in the comments below. Go ahead and tell me your story.